With your strength, you might try undoing one or two of those bonds when training.
Oh.
Untie Shenhe's ropes? Wouldn't that be risky?
Please tell us that this is a foreshadowing that perhaps we will get a Shenhe event, and maybe with that we bring in... Dude! Chongyun and Shenhe both coming to terms with their, like, spiritual, like, stuff that they were born with, and, like, an event centered around those two would be amazing, because I remember Chongyun was slowly coming to terms with his yang energy. So imagine if they were, like, training together to, like, come to terms with, like, what they were born with. That'd be amazing. I've had this Shenhe rework on the back burner for quite some time now, with the current banner being the Skirk and Escoffier duo, as well as that foreshadowing from the Lantern Rite quest. I thought it was finally time to bring this idea out into the open. The clip I showed is more focused on lore, but as we've seen as of late, lore and gameplay do go hand in hand. If they're finally going to unbind Shenhe from the red ropes, it might be hinting at game developments that she'll get a buff as well. So for this episode of Unit 2.0, I'm gonna cover a rework idea for Shenhe, and give her buffs that make her a much stronger character for the entirety of the Cryo roster. As always, additional info is down below, and captions are available if you need them. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's start off with the main flaws in Shenhe's kit. Her role is being a dedicated cryo buffer, and this is a super niche role. Unlike other supports who specialize in certain teams or archetypes, Shenhe focuses on a specific type of damage, and sadly, despite having such a concentrated niche, she doesn't provide as much for that niche to make her a competitive choice. Obviously, increasing the numbers is one of the ways we can buff her kit, but this is a game design focused video, so it's not really worth covering here. One mechanic that's going to be a talking point here is the Icy Quill mechanic. Icy Quills are a special buff that provide cryo base damage bonuses. The part I find pretty cool is that the quills are independent for each party member, but this has its own pros and cons. The biggest pro is that because stacks are independent, you don't have to worry about them being stolen by less valuable characters. Let's just say I'm running Ayaka and Shenhe together. Both of them deal cryo damage pretty frequently, but Ayaka is the one who actually builds for damage. If the quills were pooled, Shenhe would steal a lot of stacks that Ayaka could utilize much better. Now, for the main con. Quills are only consumed when party members deal cryo damage. The only party member who can use this mechanic are other cryo characters or animal characters with cryo-infused abilities. And this means every single unit who can't deal cryo damage gets their own set of unusable quills. I want to address the issue of her Icy Quills and make it so that every stack finds a purpose in her gameplay. This entire rework was made pre-Escoffier and Skirk, which made a power creep issue when I came back to the concept. I still want Shenhe to be a general cryo buffer, but any buff I make to her results in a buff to the Skirk teams or the Escoffier freeze teams. After I cover the rework details, I'm gonna add a section where I discuss some ideas on how to address the power creep issue. But for now, let's cover the actual rework. I'm gonna start with the burst because it's the most generic set of changes. Shenhe's A1 passive, which is the cryo damage bonus, is gonna be moved into her burst. The burst becomes a bit more important to level up since the cryo bonus scales with talent level. This will also free up the A1 passive for Shenhe to use. As another change, I think making the cryo field follow the active character would be a good way to provide movement flexibility in your teams. Finally, some optional changes that would be nice but aren't necessary. These changes would be to increase the cryo and physical res shred, and increase the damage of her burst hits. It might either make Shenhe a decent alternative to Escoffier, who also has res shred and damage, but it might also make freeze teams extra powerful when paired together, which I'd like to avoid. I considered buffing her ICD, but I ultimately decided to keep it where it is. In freeze, slow ICD doesn't really matter because other cryo characters carry the application. In melt teams, slower ICD is actually better, since it prevents Shenhe from stealing melts off the dedicated DPS. Moving on is the skill. The skill is actually where the bigger changes are, and this will cover the issue with her stacks. Shenhe will now provide 9 stacks to each party member if you tap her skill, and 15 if you hold it. This right here is more of a feels crafting change, not a theory crafting one. The amount of quills she gives out right now is 5 when you tap her skill and 7 when you hold it. And sometimes it just feels like uptime on the ability is really short. A character like Ayaka can shred through this in like 1 second, but even normal attack units like Skirk and Wriothesley feel like they have low uptime because they deal way more than 7 hits of damage in a single rotation. And if you hit multiple enemies with a single strike, multiple stacks get consumed at once, further speeding up the process of stack degeneration. By increasing the stack count, more of your cryo hits get buffed, and this does feel better when playing, since you know you're getting better uptime. In a tap skill team, people tend to do 2 taps in a rotation, so you actually get 18 stacks in every rotation. Then for hold skills, you get a flat 15 since you can't double cast. Right now, stacks still have this issue where non-cryo damage units can't use the bonus. Alternatively, characters with slower cryo hits might not use all of their stacks. So this next part allows unused stacks to find a purpose. At the end of the skill's 10 or 15 second duration, Shenhe will deal a single instance of AoE cryo damage. Each unused Icy Quill stack will additionally buff the base damage of this attack. This gives Shenhe some personal damage potential, but it also once again addresses the issue of unused stacks. Now, the utility of the quills gets reallocated to be a damage-dealing ability. Triple cryo teams such as an Ayaka, Shenhe, Escoffier core are gonna allocate more stacks towards the cryo buffing and less stacks towards the cryo hit. But when you look at double cryo such as a Wriothesley or Ganyu Melt team, less stacks get used towards the buffs. So Shenhe inherently gets more stacks for her personal damage, and if you have a Pyro Aura present, this already strong hit gets boosted even more when you melt it. You can technically go for other kinds of utility with this mechanic, but I specifically chose damage because it's probably the most thematically accurate thing to Shenhe. Yes, her gameplay focuses on being a buffer, but in the lore, this woman can throw down. As a kid, she fought a monster with God Remains. She later on fought Osial's wife, she threatened violence against rude customers at Wanmin Restaurant, actually resorted to violence against a rude customer, and carried this thing. Let's be real, do we really expect her to heal? I would say the damage of this has a low base multiplier, but high stack multipliers. So teams with high quill consumption have a dinky Shenhe damage hit, and teams with low quill consumption will see a nuke at the end. I also added a failsafe mechanic for anyone running Shenhe with her C1. If you cast her skill before the duration ends, her cryo damage instance will occur immediately after. This actually means you could do a tap-tap strategy to front-load her damage. The first skill focuses its stacks onto her cryo hit, while the second can focus on her cryo buffing. The trade-off is that you get less quill stacks for overall buffing, but if you run a team with less cryo damage hits, this might be a viable strategy to improve Shenhe's personal damage. Oh, and as other small buffs, Shenhe's hold skill now generates 5 particles instead of 4. This makes energy stuff a bit more on par with the tap playstyle. While the tap generates 3, you can do this twice in a rotation for a total of 6 particles. The other small buff takes a page out of Durin's A4 passive. In his notes, a single instance of his burst hitting multiple enemies will only consume 1 stack. So we can also make it so that Shenhe's quills are consumed in the same capacity. This makes it much more consistent in AoE scenarios, which prevents her stacks from getting eaten up way too fast. Moving on, the idea of utility reallocation is also going to tie into Shenhe's new A1 passive. When Shenhe's skill unleashes its cryo hit, every party member regenerates 0.4 energy based on the collective amount of icy quills remaining. This effect can only occur once every 15 seconds. One of the issues Shenhe has is that she's a victim of the version 2 energy meta. She has an 80 cost burst and pretty high ER needs. Energy isn't as much of an issue for her in triple cryo freeze, but it can sometimes be an issue in double cryo. It's also worth noting that energy can be an issue for other party members. Some common teammates can include Furina in freeze or Xiangling in melt. With this passive, characters who aren't Cryo immediately contribute their stacks to both Shenhe's damage and team-wide energy regen. In double Cryo teams such as Wriothesley or Ganyu Melt, you'd likely do a hold skill playstyle for a total of 15 stacks per party member. 2 party members cannot deal Cryo damage, so they contribute a total of 30 stacks to Shenhe's damage and team-wide energy. This alone regenerates 12 energy for the entire party, which will be a massive relief for some of those ER-hungry characters. Meanwhile, a triple Cryo team such as Ayaka, Furina, Escoffier, and Shenhe would use a tap skill. Because every Cryo member would clear the stacks in the skill duration, Furina would be the only character contributing only 9 stacks to the team's energy regen, which is a value of 3.6. Since the cooldown of the passive is 15 seconds, you can't double this energy with 2 tap skills. In the end, it's a super low amount, but it balances out because you'd naturally have more particles flying around in this team anyway. To add another niche thing, I mentioned the C1 exploit where you could do a tap-tap method to front-load Shenhe's damage. Technically, you can do this method to front-load the energy passive and regenerate around 14 energy this way. Just like the damage aspect, front-loading these skill charges lowers the total amount of icy quills you use for the Cryo damage buffing. Once again, you have to think about the trade-off. Finally, let's talk about Shenhe's new A4 passive. I wanted the buff to feel more unique for a Cryo buffing unit, so instead of general damage percent bonuses, Shenhe will now have this. For 20 seconds after casting her skill, she grants a special buff to the party. For every 100 attacks Shenhe has, the party's Cryo damage now deals increased crit damage against Cryo or Frozen affected enemies, and has its melt damage increased. This bonus plays into the 2 main archetypes that Cryo has. Freeze teams already specialize in crit rate, so a crit damage bonus would pair pretty well. Then for Melt, the bonus is a direct booster towards that damage. Making this ability, I went in a direction of a reverse Citlali. Citlali's A1 passive provides Res Shred when characters trigger Melt or Freeze, but that Shred is for Pyro and Hydro damage. So Citlali's not really designed around being a Cryo buffer. Shenhe, on the other hand, utilizes Freeze and Melt to specifically buff Cryo damage. The inclusion of Cryo-affected enemies enables you to keep the crit damage bonus, even against enemies that can't be frozen. It also means any team with an underlying Cryo aura works, with Mono Cryo and Varka Cryo being just a couple alternative options. I didn't provide exact numbers, but with how it's described, the bonus for the Freeze and Melt archetypes can be separately adjusted. We know Melt has been on the decline as of late, so that bonus can be much higher as opposed to the Freeze bonus. Alternatively, we could keep the bonus around the same value, and we could make a separate Melt-focused unit to elevate those teams and work well with Shenhe. Speaking of teams, let's discuss how our current Cryo characters get buffed as a result of the Shenhe rework. I'm splitting it up into 2 main archetypes, Freeze/Mono Cryo, and Melt. Based on the current meta, Freeze teams would get a smaller buff compared to Melt, to once again address the power creep issue that Escoffier and Skirk caused. They're powerful enough as they are, so I held back on the buffs there. The premium Freeze teams are now triple Cryo, which results in lower energy regen from the A1 passive, but they still benefit from the increased stacks, and the crit damage bonuses from the A4 passive. For Melt, I actually put a lot more thought into making these units perform much better. Shenhe's a character who's usually only chosen in Freeze and isn't really an option for Melt. Starting off, I designed the energy passive to work much better here. Melt teams usually run a double Cryo core, so less stacks get consumed for buffing and more will go into the energy regen. Xiangling is one of the go-to options for this team, so it addresses her high ER needs. Since Ayaka and Skirk aren't the best Melt carries, this buff works significantly better on Ganyu and Wriothesley, which I find good because I always saw these two as general Cryo carries. So the fact that they can benefit from both archetypes pretty well is a really strong boost in their viability. They were also the 2 characters I wanted to buff more, since the Freeze units are in good standing already. Chaska also works as a Melt carry, and since she deals Cryo damage less frequently, she might have stacks left over when Shenhe deals her new kit. The other aspect is looking at how Shenhe can be played with this new rework. The main one I want to touch on is that building her for damage is now an option, but I also think this is much better for melt teams as opposed to a freeze team. In a freeze team, you have triple or double cryo. Triple cryo will consume more stacks, which lowers Shenhe's personal nuke damage. It's also noteworthy that triple cryo teams will generally have multiple cryo characters building for damage, which boosts the power of the icy quills. Double cryo means more stacks go into the nuke, and less go into her buffing, so you could consider running Shenhe on a damage build to compensate. Now for melt teams, the idea is similar to double cryo freeze, but I think there's other aspects that make her nuke much more effective here. Not only does double cryo mean more stacks go towards the personal damage, if you time the hit correctly, Shenhe can melt the hit to deal even more damage, a melted hit that also gets buffed by her A4 passive. When I look at melt teams with Shenhe, I'm generally considering a double Pyro Core with Bennett. Bennett usually runs Noblesse, which provides a team-wide 20% attack bonus. Double Pyro also provides 25% attack with its Resonance. Adding it up is 45%, which is right below an attack goblet, so even if you replace one of your artifact pieces with cryo damage or crit, the attack you get from external sources could make up for that sacrifice. Basically, in Melt, she still has a lot of attack for both buffing and personal damage. This isn't to say you shouldn't build for damage on Freeze or that buffing builds are worse on Melt, but I think the team building factors in both archetypes provide unique incentives for different Shenhe builds. Okay, now to address the elephant in the room. As I mentioned earlier, this kit rework was designed pre-Escoffier and pre-Skirk, which meant I didn't have to worry too much about balancing with Shenhe, since Cryo as a whole needed strong buffs. Back then, I was only focused with Ganyu, Wriothesley, and Ayaka as the three main units who would work best with Shenhe, and now I had to be mindful that these changes wouldn't make the Skirk Escoffier stuff even more powerful than they already are. This approach is not just a good way to keep certain teams in check, it's also the more realistic method because we've already done this in the game. The method being, include Shenhe in a roster for a Liyue faction mechanic. I'm very partial to the theme of this being Adepti and Adepti adjacent characters. For the purposes of this video, the relevant units are Shenhe, Ganyu, Xiangling, and Yelan. Shenhe is a disciple of Cloud Retainer, Ganyu herself is an Adeptus but also a disciple of Cloud Retainer, and then Xiangling is a disciple under Madame Ping. Lore-wise, these three fit the bill. Yelan is a bit more of a reach, but I wanted to include a Hydro character for the free synergy. The lore connection I made is that she and Xiao had a lot of interactions in a Liyue Archon quest. It's also mentioned that her ancestor and Bosacius, one of the 5 Yaksha, had also worked together in the past. While Yelan is more associated with the Qixing, I wouldn't be surprised if she was included in the Adepti list. And to clarify this, yes, Xingqiu can be an alternative Hydro character for this mechanic. Here's how this direction with the Adepti buffs would play out for Shenhe. Shenhe with Ganyu is the most direct duo as a DPS and support combo. Ganyu is a character who works in either a freeze or melt team, so this would directly buff her overall gameplay. In addition to Shenhe's buffs, the biggest change I can think of for Ganyu would probably be interruption resistance. If you were to run a more damage-focused team, that leaves you with little room for a shielder, but if Ganyu has good interruption resistance, you wouldn't really need a shielder. For Xiangling, the dynamic is as a dual support combo. Xiangling's high pyro application provides enough for any cryo unit to consistently melt their hits. Wriothesley is a strong melt option, so he can take advantage of this. Then there's Ganyu. Xiangling's pyro application is fast enough that Ganyu can use her burst without losing pyro uptime. This would also fall under a triple Adeptus team, so all three get their buffs. And Shenhe's singular cryo hit would also be more reliable to melt if Xiangling was the one providing the pyro. Finally, Shenhe with Yelan, or Xingqiu, for freeze. This wouldn't necessarily be a buff to current freeze teams, but rather a strong alternative option. Maybe you don't have that Furina or Escoffier combo to make the best freeze setup. So instead, you run Yelan and Shenhe, activate the Adepti Resonance, and run your freeze team there. This still allows Shenhe to reliably use her buffs in a non-Ganyu freeze team, while also preventing existing freeze teams from being power crept even more. Because as strong as a buffed Yelan and Shenhe duo would be, it probably wouldn't outdo the strength of the Furina and Escoffier duo. And just to put it out there, here are some other possible Adepti combinations I could think of when it comes to Shenhe specifically. First is her and Chongyun, with Chongyun being a DPS or sub-DPS / support. They're family, so it's only natural to want to see them in a team together. Next could maybe be Shenhe and Shenyun, but this team would only work if you could get a good Cryo Plunge unit. Finally, since Qiqi has Adeptus powers, I can imagine her being added to the roster. Maybe you could do a combination of Qiqi and Shenhe in a Varka team or something. Alright, that's gonna do it for the video. While Escoffier and Skirk are both major contributors to the resurgence of Freeze, I wanted to explore Shenhe's potential as an option for general cryo buffing. This meant making her a strong option for both Freeze and Melt, since both are considerable foundations for cryo DPS units. I do think the prospect of a Liyue resonance buff would be the most realistic and likely scenario for seeing Shenhe buffs. As for more indirect paths, we are entering Snezhnaya next year, which is the nation of cryo, so fingers crossed that down the line, new additions and characters will help make Shenhe's gameplay usage much more viable. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what you liked about this rework, what you would change, and any alternative ideas you might have. If you want to share more of your ideas with our community, consider joining my Discord server. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye!